This is episode 272 of the Super League Pod, and this is surely one to listen to at 1.5 times speed. We finished what we started last week by covering the Wolfpack withdrawal from all angles, including the Canadian one. We have no doubt unwelcome sidesteps into punctuation and politics. Plus, find out who's got a free season pass to the Hepworth and the Yorkshire Sculpture Park. Fit in some Britwatch NRL stats, your fan match reviews, and Super League match previews. And you've got probably our longest show ever. It's SLP time. Hello listeners, welcome along to episode 272 of the Super League Pod. This week, episode 2 of the Toronto League Pod. Let's face it, it's still the biggest story in the sports, despite some other really good, positive, exciting stories to talk about as well. Forget him, but that's going to be the dominant thing, so please don't turn off if you either don't want to hear us criticise Toronto or don't want to hear us be supportive of expansion or any of the views in between and around those, because it's all about sharing these different views, and we've got plenty of fan views to talk about as well as our own views, and the people that will be bringing you our own views this week is myself, Mark, and Alan. Hello, Alan.
How are you doing? We will very much try to be balanced and fair and provide a breadth of views on the whole Wolfpack situation.
Yeah, well, I'll sort of take everyone through what's to come on the show if you want to let everyone know first who this episode is sponsored by.
Yes, so this episode is sponsored by Rob's Toy Shop. You can find a wide range of toys, gifts, rugby league birthday cards and more at Rob's Toy Shop on eBay. Visit stores.ebay.co.uk/Rob's Toy Shop, and on any orders over £5 you can earn 5% cash back, and 1% of your order value will go into the SLP coffers if you put SLP discount in at checkout.
Yeah, so thanks to Rob's Toy Shop for their continued support of the show. What is on the show this week? There's loads, isn't there? We're going to have our second deep dive into the Toronto situation, this time with some help from some Wolfpack fans from Ontario to give us their take, as well as there's a poll, some fan views, loads more news. Probably after this, until we find out the fate of the Wolfpack for 2021 and beyond, there's not much more for us to talk about there, so hopefully this will kind of get all that covered from all the fan angles. We've also had a big week in virus related news, so we'll especially when it comes to who's playing in and who's not playing in certain competitions, so we'll hit on that before we skim through the rest of the week's news, and it will be probably a skim through with a little bit of a touch on what Rugby League World Cup games we're excited about. We'll give the results, stats and fan views from the NRL action, and it's a return of the previews and predictions section of the show, as we have Super League matches to discuss. So yeah, and that's when it sort of comes to a high closer to the end. But speaking of highs, we've had a shout out request, so do you want to take the listeners to shout out corner?
Yes, so there's an SLP birthday shout out to Joe Werrell, who we hear had a birthday this week. Happy birthday, Joe, also known as Fit Sister to some. The SLP birthday shout outs are brought to you by Rob's Toy Shop.
Excellent stuff. Happy birthday. Hope you've enjoyed that. And we will now get into talking about the Wolfpack, and after the music, what you'll first hear is the interview that we've done with Wolfpack fans Henry and Scott from the Wolfpack Pack antagonistic Twitter account. They were keen to point out their antagonism. So we'll have a bit of music, we'll hear from those guys, and then it'll be me and Alan with Wolfpack related news. So we want to get the Toronto perspective on things. So we've got Scott and Henry from the Wolfpack Pack along to talk from the Toronto fan perspective. So thanks for being involved, guys.
Great to be here.
No problem.
I think the starting point is taking you back to last Monday when the announcement was made. And how did you feel at the time of the announcement, I suppose? And did you see it coming at all? We'll start with you, Henry.
I think it's a mix of emotions. I think, number one, there's been so many question marks with what's going to happen with the Wolfpack. And And once they'd announced that there'd be no home games in Toronto, and we were pretty confident of that based on everything that's going on, I think we were expecting at least not to see rugby in Toronto at least this year. So I think it doesn't hit us as hard as maybe other people, but I think it caught everyone a bit by surprise when you don't think about the big picture. When you just think, okay, rugby's coming back, everyone wants to participate. When you take a step back, which we did, after a couple of days, let the dust settle, and you look at it from a financial sense, from a long-term viewpoint for the Wolfpack, it makes a lot of sense. So I think the initial emotion is disappointment, a little bit of surprise, and then after the dust settled for a few days, you kind of understand a little bit more the reasoning behind what David and the team have done to try and secure the future and try and get a better, healthier, long-term plan for the Wolfpack. Probably the timing's terrible, and at best you could say it's poor form in terms of the way and the timing that it was done. But I think you look at, there's 2 leagues that aren't coming back, and so you've only got this many teams coming back in Super League. So it shouldn't be too surprising with everything that's going on.
Yes, Scott. What about yourself? Did you see it as a surprise at all, especially because Bob Hunter had released a statement to you guys, the fans in Toronto, to sort of say that there was going to be no games in Toronto, but it did seem like they were going to be playing part in the season. This was only on the Thursday before the announcement last Monday.
Yeah, exactly. Like I'm sort of gonna go back to what Henry said. Like from a timing perspective, it just seemed like things kept lining up where there wasn't going to be any rugby from Toronto to start with. First off, obviously with the COVID situation, we have teams like the MLB, the Toronto Blue Jays, tried to come back to Toronto to play games that got rejected by the government. I didn't see any possibility that the Wolfpack were going to get teams from the UK over here. So with that announcement on the Thursday from Bob, it's like, okay, so no home games in Toronto. So that means there's not going to be that much liquid assets for the team to work with because we don't have that central fund and we don't have the TV money, etc. And then you sort of see the visa things start coming out, the fact that we have a smaller team anyways. I'm like, okay, like where is this going to go? And not going to lie, I remember I texted Henry being like, have you seen the news? He's like, let me guess. So I think it was a bit of a surprise, but after taking a look back, taking a step back and not having emotions, you're like, okay, from a finance perspective, I think this makes sense to come back stronger. From timing perspective, I think it's interesting just in the fact that you have, obviously the league is kicking off soon. So it almost looked like Toronto was trying, the 11th hour approach to try to get something done. And when it didn't happen, they pulled the plug. At least that's what some fan. I'm not in that meeting, but sure. I'd be curious to see those notes.
I mean, so Scott, how much of what has happened do you think is purely down to the virus? What do you think about some of the issues that have come along with the Wolfpack during their journey? The financial issues of not paying creditors, late payment of player wages, the fact that they agreed to join the structure without taking a share of the central revenue distributions, and maybe some of the sort of the way the squad's been built. You talked about having a small squad. How much have those issues played into it, as well as the issues down to the virus, like you say, completely removing the possibility of home games? And then sort of we'll tack on to that for you to pick up as well. How much comes down to a lack of support from maybe the other clubs in the competition, do you think?
That's a very complicated question, so I will attempt to answer that. So, essentially, I think it comes down to virus quite a bit. So the Toronto model works because Argyle is able to support us financially with liquid assets coming from either marketing or sponsorships or ticket sales. Obviously, with no ticket sales, no game day marketing, and sponsorships somewhat drying up on this side because there's no sponsor to see at a Canadian game, that's going to cause some issues. Plus, just the simple fact of when you have foreign players, there's going to be 4 of them who will not be able to play in the UK because of visa issues. Now, whether that's a whole other appeal we have to deal with, but when you lose those 4, you're now down to a 19-man roster. And rugby league's a physical sport. Obviously, there are some issues with having such a small roster that the Wolfpack had, and I think that's down to your actual GM and your managers. However, it was playable, and they were doing. I think that once they came back to Canada, would have been actually you would have seen some wins from the squad. But obviously, the virus had an issue. Realistically, you've already seen the Championship League One, drop out of the season. They're done. Halifax announced today that they're not even competing in that random tournament they'll be having later on. It's one of the questions is like, should have come back at all, right? Obviously, they have to do it for the TV deal, and those owners would like TV money. But the simple fact that the Wolfpack asked for a $200,000 loan, they would have paid it back. Although, like, you can have a laugh if it's going to be late or not. But the same club owners who got given a significant amount of money because Toronto came in and wasn't taking central funding weren't willing to give a fraction of that percentage back to the Wolfpack to stay afloat. I think that really speaks volumes on some of the sort of small-mindedness that is in rugby league. Sort of taking care of your own. Obviously, everyone's having COVID issues. And on top of that, the Wolfpack is sort of stuck in a in-between zone. So none of our employees were able to be furloughed by the Canadian government scheme. We weren't able to be furloughed by the UK government scheme. So now you're like, okay, so I guess we're just paying people, even though the rest of the clubs are getting that break. And obviously that comes with being a transatlantic team and all that jazz. But the staff at the Wolfpack, I think, have been taking a bit of a hard beating, and not necessarily correctly. We know there's people who've been doing work without being paid because they took sort of a option from the club to not do that. So, I think the virus is essentially at blame, and then all of the rest of the sort of house of cards fell. And I don't want to say the Toronto Wolfpack are a house of cards, but I think it was sort of stacked against them to start with. And then once the virus came and we knew there was a come back to Canada, it was like, okay, so how are we going to work this out? The Super League chairman decided not to support them, and now here we are.
Yeah.
At least from my perspective.
Yeah, Henry, I assume you sort of have a similar take on that. Do you think some of maybe the lack of support from the other Super League clubs is linked, or the perceived lack of support, clearly, with not fronting up to provide a loan or anything like that to support the Wolfpack? Do you think some of that is linked to some of the other problems that maybe the Wolfpack possibly, you could argue, haven't done enough to address around things like late payment of... I mean, two of the clubs in Super League didn't receive payments on time for players at the Wolfpack stand from them. Three of the clubs, actually, sorry. So do you think things like that have happened in the practices of the Wolfpack, maybe the Wolfpack have brought some of that on themselves, or do you think it is a case of small-mindedness, not looking to support the greater aims of the game?
I think what I'll say is it's a little bit of both. So the first thing I will definitely say, and we've been very vocal on it on social media, is that players and staff deserve to get paid on time in full, whether you're a rugby club or whether you're any kind of company, especially when you're promising late payments and they don't show up. So, knowing David on a personal level, I'm sure, once the dust settles, similar to some other missteps, he'll be just as disappointed as things have gone. And I think there's a level of trust you as an employer have with your employees that if you don't pay them on time, and, I think there's definitely some other issues that'll have to get addressed. But I think part of it is the club has made mistakes off the field and made too many headlines for stuff like you said with player payments, which, a lot of that's done in the back room, and not all the details are even out there, either due to legal proceedings or just because some of it's kept behind closed doors. So I can't comment too much about some of those late fees, other than the fact that if it's true, and a lot of these cases, there seems to be some evidence behind it. The Wakefield Trinity were paid late. Gary Card came on Twitter and said we're paid late. I know there was issues around Gareth O'Brien. So what I will say is those kinds of things are mistakes that happen with a new club, with how it's set up because it's transatlantic, and you rely on the experienced people that you hire to run the club to make those decisions. I also think it's part of the way that the club's set up right now with late payments, and David even addressed it, is his money and the capital to pay isn't as liquid as it probably should be due to COVID. And I think that's part of it. But I definitely think you're hitting the nail on the head. I think there's some pre-existing concerns that probably take away the sympathy from Super League clubs, so that when the Wolfpack come and say, hey, we want a $200,000 loan, and we don't know how that pitch went or how that was addressed, or maybe it was left too late, and the clubs say no, it's disappointing. Yeah. Especially as Scott said, even long-term, you've just given each club $200,000 each this season by not taking central funding. So when you ask for bridge loan to hopefully pay the player